Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum. Today I'm joined with Jared Slater and Tanner Pruitt, and want to have Jared on to talk about Square One. He has taken the course and he is now applying it with baseball, which is something I'm very excited about. I've always wanted to see this get into baseball, and so I wanted to have Jared on to kind of discuss with us how he's utilizing Square One and just hear more about who Jared is and what he's up to. So, Jared, you want to kind of give us an introduction to who you are, and then we can kind of dive into Square One.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
Yeah, so I play baseball myself, obviously. Did my undergrad at Missouri Western in exercise science. It's a small D2 in Missouri. After that, I interned at a facility in Milwaukee called BRX Performance. And then after that, I went to TCU to intern under Zach Dechant. After that, I worked at Tread. Currently at school at University of Florida, doing a master's program. And, I took Square One probably, was it March 1st of 2024. And, ever since I took it, it just, it changed my mind on how I thought about, human movement and performance, because a lot of people in the industry as a whole always looks at, okay, what's the tissue doing? Like, what is the response of the tissue? Oh, my shoulder hurts. Okay, well, let's look at scap. Let's look at serratus. Let's look at the areas around it. But we know that pain and we know that movement is regulated by the nervous system. And so that's the software component. And so a lot of people they say they look at the software component, but they actually don't look at the software. They're just saying, oh, we look at the nervous system. But with Square One, we can actually go ahead and look at the software and see, okay, like a good way to describe it is, okay, let's see where the code is getting messed up. We can actually go into the nervous system and see, okay, hey, where's the code getting messed up? Someone's shoulder could hurt. And, we look at, say we look at scap, we look at serratus, both are fine, no weakness there. But they're like, yeah, man, anterior shoulder is just killing me. And then, we can run Square One and, for whatever reason, it could be, like their third toe is causing an issue. And, yes, you could fix their shoulder with, I guess we'd call it tissue approach, which would be correctives or strengthening, but that's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6+ weeks. And it's going to be a constant maintenance thing. Or we can do, maybe even just one session of Square One, which is anywhere from, it could be 10 minutes to an hour. And we could fix that issue. And now it doesn't return because we've now looked at the software component and seen, okay, where is that missing link happening, rather than just, guessing and just chasing strength.
And I guess for me, that's what makes Square One so interesting, is you're actually addressing like a deeper layer. Like the nervous system seems to be the one that controls, or like is the thing that innervates like the muscle actions. And also too, like it's the one that's signaling to the body about pain or what's going on at you could say the Square One is looking at things at the joint level. And so I guess to kind of jump back a little bit, how did you find out about Square One? And I mean, you talked a little bit about how it changed how you look at things, but you kind of want to describe how you looked at things before and how, maybe additionally, what other things did Square One open your eyes to?
Yeah, so I first heard about Square One probably about 3 years ago now, and I actually found it through a guy named Ryan Thompson, who is another really, really good Square One guy. It's last resort training, I think. His stuff is awesome. So originally I found it, and it was this video on YouTube Shorts, and I'm scrolling one day, and I just see this guy, this really old dude, probably like in his 70s, and he's like getting up from a chair, and he's doing what really old people do, have issues where his hands are on the chair, he's like trying to push himself up. I don't even think he stood up. He's just in so much pain. And then this was back when they showed the whole square one process, and you just see a time lapse of them going through everything that square one does. And the whole time the guy's sitting down, he never once stands up. And then it like stops the time lapse, and then Ryan's like, okay, get up, and the guy just like stands up, like he never had any pain. And I remember watching this and thinking, okay, what the hell is going on? This doesn't make any sense. So I started following Ryan, and originally I thought it was his stuff, and then I realized later that it was Sean Sherman stuff in Square One. But so that's how I heard about Square One. And then to go over, how I thought about stuff before, I had recently taken Connor Harris's course right before, so I was very big on. I'd say I was big on PRI, but more so I was big on the concepts rather than the fixes. I like the ideas of how humans are all asymmetrical and we have to untwist ourselves, and to me that made sense. And the fixes worked, but one thing I noticed whenever I would prescribe someone, let's say someone's left AIC, so now we need to get them more um, ER on the left hip, and I would do it like we do ipsilateral hinges, and we'd open it up with 90-90 breathing, and I do that, and then it'd be fixed, and the next day they're like, hey man, my hip still hurts, and I'm like, okay, well, we just spent 20-30 minutes the day before hammering this out, what's going on? And we'd do it, and it'd have to be done every single day, and I felt like I was just banging my head into the wall, because in my mind, if I'm going to fix something, I shouldn't, like, yes, in general, in S&C, it takes time to do things. But my issue was I'm spending so much time and I'm getting the results right after, but they're just not sticking. And so when I took Square One and Sean exposed the reason why stuff doesn't stick, in my mind, just a switch just flipped. And to me, I just couldn't understand why people wouldn't do Square One or do this new way, because it showed me why things don't stick, and it showed me how to make things stick. Because I would prescribe all my athletes, I'd run them through an assessment, I'd have them literally breathe and see how they breathe, see what mediastinal cavities they're missing, and they'd be like, okay, we need posterior, we need middle, like whatever we need I'd prescribe. And then they would do it and they're like, yeah, I feel great. And then the next day they're like, hey man, I don't feel good anymore. I'm like, okay, let's do it again. Same thing, day after day, week after week. And it just got to the point where I was just getting so frustrated, because I'd paid all this money to take this course and it's just not sticking. These things are going back. And it's nothing against Connor, it's nothing against anyone that does that stuff. But if you have to do it every single day, and if you don't do it, you're not going to feel better. And so that's crazy to me, because even with normal PT, you're going to feel better day after day. But even then, there are some things that don't go as fast. But if I just felt like I was banging my head into a wall, because I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, because I'm following the instructions, I'm following the flow chart, I'm getting the measurements, and it's just not sticking. And then going to Square One, and with Sean at the course, he does this thing where he asks, where he shows you, hey man, the foot doesn't turn in, how would you fix this? And everyone there is always like, oh, it's an IR problem. And Sean just does that to prove to you that you have to stop looking at the expression, because the expression is a result of something else. If this is maybe getting way too much, but if the foot doesn't turn in, it's not because they're missing IR. It's because their nervous system is in a threatened state. It is perceiving something as a threat, and we have to address it. So everyone addresses range of motion issues as the issue, when the actual issue in 95% of cases, because sometimes they might actually have a structural issue. If you don't have cartilage, or you have a bony block, or you have some physical limitation that doesn't let you get into a position, no amount of software work is going to work. Like if in a car, if you don't have gas in the car's not going to turn on. You got to put gas in the car first. But in 95% of cases, the expression is not a result of a lack of range of motion. The expression, whether it's range of motion, strength, mobility, flexibility, whatever you want to call it, is a result of a faulty nervous system rather than lack of mobility.
For me, just listening to that and having experienced that, having gone down the PRI rabbit hole myself, I would even say, for me to back up, like just the way that that we traditionally had approached mobility. Here's your mobility exercise. Do your windmills or whatever. For T-spine. And it's just like, in order for this to like open up, I have to do it every single day. And it just kind of felt like I'm spinning my wheels, and the warm up is taking almost as long as the actual training session. And to me, after a while, that became like, this doesn't make sense, or there's got to be a better way. What was interesting to me, and I was talking with somebody about this yesterday, Square One actually achieves what Kelly Surrett in his book, or in his mobility book, Supple Leopard. The whole point, he's like, you should be like a supple leopard. Like, you should be able to just roll out and just be good to go. You shouldn't have to do like all this mobility stuff and whatever. And it's crazy to me that Square One actually can allow you to do that. Get to a place where you don't have to spend all this time opening up ranges of motion just to feel good. Like, your system is actually now in the way to me, the way that I'm now thinking about it is your nervous system is in an organized state. So it allows everything to work synergistically together. It's there. It's there for you. You're good to go. Whereas oftentimes throughout our life, there are different things that'll happen. I like the analogy of like, okay, if I stub my toe, then I got to work around that. And then we get all these little bumps and bruises as we go through life. And then now we have less resources to work with, and we're having to kind of work around those areas that are a little sensitive or inhibited. And Square One helps you get back to that like normal, healthy, organized state. And so for me, that's where I see the power and the potential of Square One, is just to get you back to like kind of a baseline state where your system now can actually interact with the world in a normal setting again.
I think that's one thing that I've seen as a huge misconception of Square One is it's not meant to be the end all be all of, oh, Square One, like, it's meant to do this, it's meant to do this, it's meant to do, it's meant to get you stronger, it's meant to improve mobility. It's not meant to do any of that. The whole point of Square One is just to make the body more robust, just to be able to process information. That's all the job of Square One is just to get the nervous system to process information that it normally wouldn't be able to process. And then as a result, from processing information better, the output or the expression is going to be better. One thing Sean always says is we don't control the output. All we're doing is cleaning up the input. And I've, in talking to some people about this, they're like, oh, anytime someone comes up to me and is like, hey, can I help with this? I'm like, maybe. No one knows what's going to happen until it happens. It's the same thing with injuries. It's the same thing with velocity. Same thing with, basketball, dunking. It's with sprint times. No one knows. You can, obviously do things to get you closer to your goal, but no one knows when you're going to hit your goal. Like, I can't be like, yeah, on, March 13th, you're going to throw 97, or on June 5th, you're going to run a 10-second 100. Like, you can train to do those things, but no one can predict it. The same thing with Square One. We can't predict what's going to happen. All we can do is just clean up your nervous system so you take in better information. And we're not like promising, like, it's just like a doctor. You can't promise someone you're going to fix them. You can say, hey, we're going to do everything we can and we'll see what happens. That's all we're doing, is we're just cleaning up information, making the brain, more robust, and make the nervous system more robust, so that, like stubbing your toe. So like little things in life don't mess you up. That if you accidentally take a misstep getting out of bed, or if like you miss a stair earlier in the day walking down the steps, making sure those things aren't messing you up. So you can go on through life with a nervous system that, is taking in everything that it can, rather than taking in some stuff and rejecting others.
And two, I also think about it like as far as like signaling, the signals are able to be sent, either as fast or as cleanly as possible. So I was just thinking about like a highway analogy, right? Like, okay, if you got more potholes, like you can't drive fast on the highway because you're going to wreck your car. And so you're naturally going to step on the brakes more. Whereas when you clean that up, you pave the road, you get it all nice and smooth, like you can drive fast. And I think kind of the nervous system is kind of the same way. Like that, to me, there's the signaling to the different joints or to those areas, they're either inhibited, your body doesn't know what's going on at that joint. So then why therefore would it then use something that doesn't really know what's going on in that area, or it can't talk to it, very well. So to me, that's where square one is, yeah, like you're saying, the whole goal is just to restore, you could say, the road. It's not necessarily to, make you go faster. You could go faster, or make you stronger or anything. Like, it's now that you have the ability to go fast, now you can actually do things on the road, now that everything's like cleared off. Or you could say, like, because I think clear or cleaning is a similar thing. Like, if you got more junk just sitting around, like, you can't maneuver through that as easily. So I think a lot of this is trying to explain to people what square one is and what it does. I think is tough, because I was telling somebody yesterday about it, and I was trying to explain. Yes, we do get rid of pain. We do help with range of motion, but that's not the goal. If I go into a session with that being my goal, you can sometimes end up very frustrated. And I think also too, and maybe you can speak to this, it's also because that's not necessarily the goal. It can sometimes be hard for an athlete or whoever you're working on to really understand the value of what you're doing. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, of like, how do we explain to people like the value of this, when it's not always obvious what's going on, or it might take, it's really clear. Like, if I do something and then all of a sudden I didn't have this range of motion, and then I do like one or two things, and all of a sudden it's like, bam, there's a dramatic change. That I think is more obvious for a person, but more often than not, like, I would say, like, the changes are subtle. And because of all that, I think it's, people don't associate the downstream effects of that, of like, all of a sudden I actually now don't think about being in pain anymore. And I'm like, I'm just normal.
Yeah. I think how at least how I've gone about it is just giving them like a demonstration of their nervous system. I think that's a really good way to go about it. Just showing them, like Sean's example of the foot turning in is my favorite thing to show people, just to show them that, hey, like, just because you're seeing this, it doesn't mean that you're lacking this or that this is bad. All it means is that your nervous system is threatened. And a lot of times I'll get questions from athletes saying, is everyone like this, or is this just me? And it's no, everyone's nervous system is this sensitive. And I think just giving them a demonstration, showing them, how sensitive their nervous system is and how it reacts to different stimuli. I think that's the best way to go about it, because there are times when I've done, a 45-minute session and I've made zero progress. And then it's like, all right, well, let's try again tomorrow. They come back tomorrow and we get to change in like 2 minutes. So it's just showing them before we do something, because I'm sure you've had times where you work on someone and they're fixed in 2 minutes, and then sometimes you're with a guy for 2-hour sessions and you're like, what is going on? And so I think it's super important, like you said, to explain to them, hey, what we're doing is not trying to address your issues. We're just trying to improve information. We're just trying to improve the body's ability to read and process information. And so the foot turning in is such a good example for people, because it's so small, but with so many people, they're just so surprised that, you can show them, like, I guess some things I'll do is, calling it playing with their nervous system, and just show them, hey, look, your foot's going to turn in now. Well, look, now it's not, now it is. And just showing them, this is how sensitive we are. So imagine what's happening now if, I'm just like touching your knee and your foot's not turning in. Like, how are we going to throw a baseball? How are we going to dunk? How are we going to sprint? How are we going to do all these things if me just touching your knee is causing your nervous system to freak out? So just showing them, how fragile people's nervous systems are, and then showing them, hey, don't worry, we're going to be able to make your nervous system more robust, so that when I do this, or you do jump, or you do sprint or throw, or whatever it is, your body's not going, what's going on? I don't like this, and it shuts down.
Yeah. And I think too, on that note, the other way I think about it is, like, it's actually either going to slow you down. It's going to apply the brakes while you're trying to step on the gas, because it's not, I go back to functional range conditioning and kind of the way that Spina talked about mobility. Mobility is your ability to control a range of motion. It's not just can you passively get there. And he kind of talked about like, okay, just because you have a range of motion doesn't mean you have control in that range. And so maybe the whole reason that your body was tight was to keep you out of that range or to slow you, to decel you going into that range so you don't actually hurt yourself. And so to me, that kind of comes back to the fact that, because even within FRC, the whole idea of CARs or controlled articular rotations is about getting more or exploring the range of motion so that you get more information about what's going on at that joint. Like by moving slowly through that range of motion, all of a sudden you're gaining greater awareness, that mind-body connection that I also associate with like bodybuilders. Like they're really big on like that mind-body connection when they're doing a rep and really trying to target the tissue that they're trying to get to hypertrophy or to grow. And so similarly, that is a like that I think is important to, like when we go to move, if we don't have good awareness or the body doesn't think it knows what's going on at that joint, it's going to inhibit the amount of forces that are going to go around or through that joint and try to slow it down or whatnot. And if we're doing something like sport where we need to be able to contract and move fast, then that might be a thing that's inhibiting us from doing that. Additionally, the way that I think about it from an ecological perspective and thinking about it from a degrees of freedom standpoint, the more degrees of freedom I have, the more different combinations and ways that I can solve a problem. So when it comes to you talking about robustness, not just robustness of the nervous system, but robustness in terms of our ability to solve a problem, let's say throw a strike, execute a pitch. The more different ways that we are able to have to solve that problem when a perturbation comes, meaning, okay, my lead foot hits the ground and it slips a little bit because the dirt happens to be, kind of off a little bit. Okay, can I still throw a strike? Right? Or if the hole that my back foot is in, is now all of a sudden starting to change, like, okay, can I still get moving down the mound and find a way to control my direction so that the ball still ends up where I need it to end up? Or it could be the same thing as my shoulder fatigues a little bit, or my elbow or my muscles. Do I have other ranges of motion available to me so that I can still solve that problem? And actually, this is something that I took from Dr. Osterser. He talked about like, okay, if I have different solutions, I might be able to shift the fatigue around a little bit. And also too, then if I'm able to safely move in different ranges of motion, then I'm also reducing my risk of injury via overuse, or just I end up in a unique position that I haven't been before. I'm reducing my risk of injury there. Because I think that's the other reason that sometimes people get hurt is like, I've never been in that range of motion before. So anyways, that's kind of my long rant of like, if I can give you more degrees of freedom, now you have more resources to problem solve with, which then in theory, one, I have higher performance and I have a reduced risk of injury.
I think to that point too is, if the result of running square one is gaining mobility, you still have to have the tissue adaptation as well. Just because you open range of motion, now it doesn't mean, okay, I can now use these extra 15 degrees and max in 10. Like that's just not how it works. You still have to go end range isos. You still have to do, end range eccentrics. You still have to train that position, but now we're just giving your body the ability to get into that position. I think that's another thing too, is that so many people try for so long, the whole argument, do you need mobility? Like yes and no, it depends. If you can, do the task of throwing a strike at a high velocity without mobility and you stay healthy, great, you don't need mobility. Or if we deem that, hey, you need mobility, great, we'll do that. But if you gain mobility, like people, if you're the athlete that falls into the category of, okay, we need mobility, now how are we going to get there? Are we going to, rip FRC for 15, 20 minutes a day and like cramp until the cows come home or whatever? Like are we going to do that day after day after day after day or week after week? Like that's just not productive. We're like talking about training economy. We're now wasting time, especially in a sport like baseball, especially as a pitcher, where our training economy is so small compared to every other sport and every other position, that we need to spend our time really, really effectively. And so if we're spending so much time trying to gain mobility when, you know, we could run square one and see if that cleans it up. And if that cleans it up, have the mobility. Now, instead of spending those extra weeks of trying to gain this mobility, now we can go in the weight room and now we can actually train and strengthen those end range positions. We can train that extra 20 degrees of T-spine rotation. We can train those extra 15 degrees of hip flexion. We can actually do things with the mobility that we've gained quicker and sooner. And it's not, oh, we sped it up, now your chance of getting injured is higher. No, I'd argue it's actually the opposite, because we've actually made your body, we've put your nervous system in a position where it wants to be there rather than forcing it. And, sometimes I've described mobility not using square one as like a crowbar in the door. Like, you're just going to stick that crowbar in there, you're going to, wrench it and try and get it out. And you break the door. That's what happens to your body. If you try and force the body into a position, it's not going to like it. It's going to break that. You're going to rip off the hinges. You're going to you can't force the body into anything. So if you get the body to accept the range of motion first, and then we've now saved weeks of mobility. Now we can spend weeks on strength. And now we're 6 to 8 weeks ahead of everyone else you're competing with.
To just kind of go off of that analogy of the crowbar, if you're using a crowbar, you probably are not understanding how the thing works. And so I think that's kind of the other element is like, okay, there's a reason why things are tight. There's a reason why you don't have that range of motion. And so I think, to me, the underlying reason goes back to, again, like awareness, signaling. Can I actually understand, or does the body have good information coming from that joint? Right? I think about it like from the mechanistic standpoint, like, okay, there's mechanoreceptors that are at the joint that are giving us information about what's going on at the joint. But I think based upon like the isometric, to me, or the intervention, there has to be, it's not just the mechanoreceptors that we're interacting with. I actually think it's the muscles that interact with that make the joint move, essentially. So then by proxy, that's affecting the mechanoreceptors. But anyways, Tanner, I wanted to kind of loop you into the conversation. Is there anything specifically that you, either a question you have or an observation at this point?
No, not really. I just like that you guys are bringing up that, yes, even if you do open up range of motion, it's not like you're completely safe to just max effort, high velocity in those ranges. Just because I can see, because I'm an outsider, I haven't taken this course, but I've been worked on by somebody that knows square one. And so it's like, I can easily see people thinking that like, oh, I've opened up, I'm good to go. And it's like, no, we still need to train that. So I think that's an important theme that was brought up, and I like that it's being talked about. But when we talk about, the body processing information, like Garrett, I think you brought up, like, if the mound is off or whatever, right? Like, I guess my question is, like, for somebody who maybe has never had square one, that system, done on them before, but yet they're highly adaptable. Like, what do we account that towards? Is it just they're just better, or is their nervous system just more okay than others? Like, how do we explain those situations when somebody's facing more perturbations to the system, and yet they're still able to problem solve? Like, is that just because their nervous system is just more attuned and it's fine?
So I think,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's a two-part answer. I think that just how we have genetics, and some people have superior genetics, some people have superior nervous systems. So sometimes I'll work on someone, and like in square one, in order to run square one, they have to be triggered. Some people are just really hard to trigger, and that's just their nervous system. There's there's no way about it. On the other hand, just because you have a perturbation, or just because you have a slip or something doesn't go right, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to perform the task. So just because your foot slips, it doesn't mean you're not going to throw a strike. It doesn't mean you're not going to throw your same velocity. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that, what if your foot, let's say you're in the second inning, and your foot slips, you throw a strike, nothing hurts, everything's fine. But now we get to the sixth, seventh inning, and now all of a sudden you're having this hip pain that you've never had before in your life. Maybe it was a result of that. So we don't know what's affecting them until we test it. Now, you can't really test in the middle of a game. I mean, there are, but that's a story for another time. But like, we can't test, a guy throws a pitch. We can't like call time, go out there and test him, make sure he's good. But we can give him tools to, reset himself if that does happen. So I think to sum up the answer, I think that, people who, are able to complete the task, given crazy situations, are one, just great athletes, and they're really good at their sport, and they're really good at the skill of their sport. But how it's affecting their nervous system, we don't know how it's going to affect their nervous system. It could not affect them at all because they just have a superior nervous system, or it could crush them. We don't know. But I think that question really is just a combination of good nervous systems, and it might affect them, it might not. Don't know.
Gotcha.
And how I look at it too, just even going off that last piece, is there are certain things that, like he's saying, trigger their nervous system. And I look at it as like, okay, how resilient is your nervous system? So you can have a really highly attuned nervous system that is really like, to me, to use the S&C example that most people have heard of, like you can potentiate the nervous system, right? So that now it's way more responsive. And sometimes you just wake up, right? Your nervous system or the world is always interacting with your nervous system. So it can positively affect, you can do certain things, or certain things can happen to you or in your environment that causes a positive reaction within the nervous system. So again, and this is kind of the thing, that the way that I look at it from like an ecological perspective, right? All this exploration is a ton of rich information to the nervous system. And so it generally is going to be positive. But if you do, let's say there are certain things like, there are different sort of triggers out there. So for example, if your nervous system happens not to be as robust and resilient, it might be highly attuned, okay, but then a certain stressor is introduced, whether it's like, I don't know how much we've played with this, but like light, a certain type of light, color of light gets shined in your eyes, a certain chemical, a certain smell, just different sort of things. Or like, I just happen to get in a position that like I've never been in before, extreme range of motion, whatever. At the first time wasn't a big issue. It was like a minor threat. It was like just, a little nick. But then I happen to do it again. Now that nick becomes like a little bit deeper. And like, you just do different things. And all of a sudden now that starts to affect everything else of how I move. Like there's been enough conversation within the baseball world that we can all understand that like, okay, one small thing, because if let's go pitching, right? There's one pitching guy. It's like, well, how you start influences everything down the chain, and so like if your setup, if you alter one little thing, like it can affect everything else downstream. Well, it's kind of the same thing again with the nervous system. That can be the case, or sometimes the system is robust enough that it can work around that, and like those perturbations don't affect it. So I think to your point, everybody is different, and it's kind of that 4 quadrant of like, okay, I have a highly attuned nervous system that's super robust, that's up in this quadrant, and I have like a highly attuned system, but it's not robust, and then that quadrant where it's like not sensitive, like down regulated and super weak, or not weak, but like very sensitive nervous system, right? So like you have all these different combinations of like resilient, but like the nervous system just is really down regulated, doesn't have a whole lot of resources to work with, that sort of a thing. And so that's at least to me how I think about it.
And I was gonna say to that point as well, the whole point, another thing with square one is that we don't want to have to use it. The whole point is to not use it, which sounds funny, but it makes sense if you think about it, because if I have to constantly work on you, you have a pretty terrible nervous system. So the goal is, okay, I work on you for an hour. 2 weeks later, I work on you for 30 minutes. The next time I see you is maybe 2 months. Maybe it's 4 months. The whole point of this is for me not to see you, because if I have to keep doing stuff to you, it could either mean 1, you have a really terrible nervous system, or 2, you have some structural issue. You have something else going on that needs to get looked at. Because I think that's a huge thing in our field, that might be an unpopular opinion, but so many people will give you stuff just to have you keep coming back to them. They just they want you to come back and come back because that's how they make their money. They don't really care about helping you. They just want you to keep coming back. And that is not the way to treat an athlete, especially someone who's trying to get better at their sport. Is hey, if I'm going to be a really, really good coach, my goal is to, one, make you really good, but also make you your own coach so that you can fix yourself. If you have an issue, you don't need me. And with Square One, that's what I love about it, is it gives them the ability to fix themselves so they don't need me. So if something does happen, they can fix themselves. I'll go over how to do it in my first session with them, but then, they're good. And they only come to see me if they really have an issue that they can't figure out. And that's my favorite thing about this, is that it's meant to almost not be used. And it's meant to really give the power to the athlete rather than keeping the power for the coach.
And to kind of get into that a little bit more, I kind of want to give like a big overview of like kind of how the system works. Um, in order to run the system, the nervous system has to be in a triggered or threatened, you could say, state. It has to, or disorganized. And so if the system is threatened, disorganized, or I can't remember the other word I used, but anyways, if it's in that state, then we can run the system. And then once we identify the joint action that is basically, in my mind, the weak link, and we restore neurological function to that joint action, then we impose another stressor or the same stressor. And the beautiful part about the Square One system is it's got a test retest model. Like that's a fundamental component of it. And so we basically retest. All right, now does the stressor cause the nervous system to become disorganized? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then we go find the weak link again, clear that out, and then we retest the stressor. Oh, you know what? This doesn't now affect the nervous system. Great. Now the nervous system is now resilient to that stressor. And then we find another stressor, because the world is full of these different stressors, and so we just go find them, and we basically identify the weak link, and we keep clearing stuff out until we get to the point of like, okay, now you're resilient to this stressor. Then we keep running the process. Now you're resilient to this stressor. And to his point, like I should get, in theory, like, or rather, this has also been Sean's experience, especially early on when he was first starting. It was like, all right, I can't find any ways to to make you quote unquote weak or stress out your nervous system or disorganize it. I guess I'm done. Like I can't do anything else with you today because I can't run my system. And that is actually the goal, is to get to the point where I put you on the table and I try to trigger you. I can't. All right, well, can't do anything with you today as far as Square One is concerned. And so to me, when you get to that point, the nervous system is super resilient. And so then when you go into a situation and you're basically, to me, this goes back to this notion of dexterity, right? So, or, the idea that Sean Mishka talks about, abundance preceding dexterity. So now all of a sudden I've given the body all this degrees of freedom, which creates abundance. And then that abundance can turn into dexterity as far as, okay, now in any given situation, the nervous system still has all these degrees of freedom to work with. And so then when you go to try to problem solve, like it's all there for you. And all these different things that the world throws at you doesn't throw off your nervous system, so that you have all the resources available for you. And so to me, that's where I see like the power of Square One is in making the nervous system resilient to all these different stressors.
And what you said is my favorite part about it. It's built in as a test retest model, which is what science is all about. It's all about hypothesis, confirm, deny. Like that's all we're doing. We're just formulating an experiment, and we're seeing what the result is. And we can retest that experiment over and over and over and over again. And I think one other thing I want to address with this is that Square One isn't meant to be the system to run. It's meant to be worked in with everything else. One thing Sean explains or how we talked about Square One is not a tool. It's more of the toolbox that holds all of the tools. It's not meant to be replaced. It's not meant to be the best hammer. It's not meant to be the best drill. It's meant to be the box that you carry the hammer, the drill, the saw, because what it does is it allows the other systems and the other things you already do to just work better. That's all it's doing. It's just causing things to work better. And the best part is you can test, retest. You can test your own, your systems, and you can test the things you do and retest them. And then you can test them with square one, and you're going to see the difference is that what you do works but doesn't stick. Like everything everyone does already works. That's why athletes get better. Even if you don't do square one, athletes will get better. They'll get healthier. But what if it could happen faster? Is really it. And the ability to test what's actually going on and then do the exact thing that caused them to mess up in the first place and to make sure it doesn't mess up, I think is what separates square one from, besides the fact that it sticks, separates it from everything, is that we have the ability to, hey, let's squat. All right, test you fail. Okay, clear it, try again. Fail, okay, cleared again. Let's say they pass. We've now just saved your nervous system from, I don't know, however many reps you had that day of faulty inputs, of disorganizing inputs. Like an example I've been talking about with people now when it comes to lifting is, let's say you have, say you have 3 sets of 8. So you have 24 reps of squats. Let's say the first 2 reps of your squats are good and the rest are disorganizing. So out of the 24 reps you've done, 22 of those reps were disorganizing inputs. So yes, we're still going to get physical tissue adaptations. Yes, we're still going to rip tissue. Yes, we're still going to have damage. But what if out of those 24 reps, we could get 24 organizing inputs? So now, not only when the tissue is damaged, the nervous system theoretically, at least this is now my opinion, I think theoretically, if you get organizing inputs with tissue damage, you will build back that tissue quicker. And I believe it's going to be thicker because the body is accepting that damage versus rejecting that damage. And this is all theoretical. I have no way of finding this out. But just from doing square one so much and seeing what it can do, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
And the other way that I look at it too is that, okay, there's that point at which it is stimulating in a positive effect, meaning it's regenerative, in the sense of like you're getting a positive super compensation. Because there are times, right? Like I think we've all experienced it being in the weight room where like, and I did that extra 1 rep and like now, like I wasn't tight. And now after doing that 1 rep, I'm tight, or now I'm like rotated, or like now I'm in pain. And it was just like 1 rep. And like that's where it like kind of flipped. But there was always, the nervous system was probably signaling something even before then. And that's where, like, for example, VBT, right? It's kind of like a way to peek into the nervous system. Because again, like when we go back to the testing too, the muscle testing is different. We're not doing break testing as in, say, for example, something like RPR. Or other sort of modalities. This is more, we're testing how quickly can your nervous system respond. And that is something similar to like VBT, or when you think about it, like if I'm using a radar gun to try to assess, okay, if I see a drop off, okay, we're starting to be fatigued. There's something going on at the nervous system level that the nervous system is starting to downregulate, whether the nervous system is becoming fatigued, etc. That's kind of what's going on. And then when that happens, we're at a greater risk of injury too. And so like the body isn't dumb. It's now trying to keep you safe, keep you healthy. But if you're going to override that, anyways, so I'm getting off on a different tangent. My main point there is that square one has the potential to reduce that the risk of potential injury, because now the system is more robust. So now it's going to, now I can say more safely navigate that. But additionally, to me, the other piece is like, well, let's say you were talking about like, okay, that second rep, well, okay, now it starts to drop off. All right, well, what if I do square one? Now I can actually maintain that output. So now, or two, the body doesn't view that as a threat. So now it's also I'm not going to gain all those negative side effects that I would from doing those reps. So to me, that's where I was talking about it too yesterday. I was like, okay, we used to, when we were doing velo pull down phase, all right, it was like 3 throws with each. Well, what if with square one, I can extend that to 4 or 5? And then what if now I can come back 4 days later or 5 days later, so now twice a week, I can throw at high intent. Well, you just compound that over, 4 weeks. Like all of a sudden I've almost doubled my my output of what I did. So I got more reps working on that thing, then I have more potential to actually achieve that. So that's where I see square one is also just like it can also extend the quality reps that we're doing. Tanner, any other thoughts that you have based upon that stuff or observations?
No, not really, honestly. I don't know. I'm just kind of enjoying listening from two guys that have actually gone through it all.
Well, I kind of want to go back to so you mentioned that you had somebody work on you. Like, what was that experience like? What now having experienced it, because we actually um, we actually did a recording of this one time before. It was before you had actually even experienced square one, and
Right.
so now that episode is lost, it's actually kind of more fun now that you've actually experienced it to hear. Okay, now having experienced it a little bit, what was your experience like, and then two, maybe kind of how did you feel afterwards, and what could you then, I don't know, what do you see as potential affordances, I guess maybe is a good word there, when it comes to square one?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is, I'm one of Yuji Suzuki's clients, and I've been out of pain for a very long time. So this wasn't necessarily a session to get out of pain. It was just this guy wanted to get practice using his systems. So yeah, I gained range of motion in my throwing shoulder, gained some ER, gained some IR. He's like, all right, let's see how well your T-spine rotates, because this guy already knew that there's not much range there. And he goes, okay, yeah, just as bad as I thought it would. Now he goes, okay, do these things, try it again. Okay, we've got a little more, retest, test, like all those things. And he's like, all right, yeah, now you've got full range and use of your T-spine. So I was like, okay, like that's cool. Like, getting into that position, now it was super decontextualized and just a typical just T-spine rotation, movement. But I was like, oh, okay, getting into that position, like I don't feel anything tighten up. I don't feel any pain. Just because I think I had two like missed or slipped ribs on my left side. So rotating was always a problem. I got it fixed, but it still would hurt to get into those ranges. And now, like, okay, my body knows, or my CNS knows, I'm not going to get hurt getting into those positions anymore. But when I went to throw afterwards, I wouldn't say there was any really changes in movements, I guess you could say. Like I was still moving very similar. There was something like that was done with, my linear move and my delivery that it did change subtly, but it wasn't anything major to where I was like, oh, that is so different. It was like, yeah, it just feels like I'm rotating a little bit later. Like it wasn't anything major. So I guess, I mean, getting into certain positions didn't feel as tight, but I wouldn't say that it was affecting everything as big as I guess I expected it to. Now it was still beneficial because now I've got range and, hopefully I'm more robust, but this is so fresh where I'm still figuring out like, oh, what can I do? What are the affordances available?
I think that goes into the whole point of, sometimes we see these amazing changes right away. And sometimes, like you said, it's just a little bit. But at the end of the day, we'll all take that 0.01% because it's going to get us closer to where we want to be. And so I have a little backstory about Tanner's session. And I think the biggest thing too that I've noticed is whether the session is in person or it's a remote session, I think matters. I have done remote sessions and I've done in-person sessions, and the changes I've been able to make in person, like I've made changes remotely, but the in-person changes I've made have been vastly greater than the remote sessions. So this is something I'll probably have to talk to Sean about, but in general, I just want to really go back to the point of like, this is the whole idea is we don't know what's going to happen. All we're doing is clearing up information. That's all we're doing. And, like maybe improving your mobility, maybe now next week you went to lift and you're stronger. I don't know. Or maybe you've noticed, your gait pattern is better. Maybe you've noticed like you can, think clearer, or you can we don't know. Like we don't know what we're doing until it happens. And so I think a really big point is when a lot of people see square one and see what it can do and they get worked on, they're like, oh, why didn't something crazy happen to me? It's because, well, we don't know, and one thing Sean likes to talk about is like having fresh meat. For some reason, people who haven't been worked on with square one exhibit like vastly greater changes than people who've had like a full hour session of square one. Now it's probably because they've been worked on, they're more robust, but in general, you know, just because you've never been worked on before, it doesn't mean you're going to see this incredible change immediately. And to that point, also, like I think one thing that's I hope doesn't get lost is that square one does not change the rules of anything. Like it doesn't change the laws, it doesn't change properties, principles, it doesn't change any of that. Like if we're improving static range of motion, we're not going to improve dynamic range of motion. We're not going to improve dynamic movement by improving static movement. Now we can improve dynamic movement by running square one with dynamic movement. But again, if we can improve static range of motion by just clearing up information, maybe we can improve dynamic range of motion because the body's just able to process more stuff.
Yeah.
And two,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, so I was just gonna say, like, I hope it wasn't seen as like my comments as negative, because the static range of motion that I gained both in my shoulder and my spine were pretty dramatic. Like it was pretty significant. Like he had me do the sleeper test, and I barely got 45 degrees maybe. And he's like, okay, we cleared some things out, 2 or 3 rounds, and I could get my palm to touch the ground. Like pretty dramatic, I would say, because I've never been able to do that. But at the same time, like I just didn't notice that part affect or being affected in the throw, in the dynamic side.
I've noticed that so much. So like with all the guys I've worked on is, okay, I assess you and you have no T-spine. I fix your T-spine. Like doesn't mean now that we're now literally on one leg, moving forwards, trying to rotate with a weighted object in our hand and a glove. Now the nurse is going, what the hell is going on? So just because again we do it in the static doesn't mean that we have it in dynamic. But to your point, like if you can improve range of motion, like if in a sleeper stretch we get your palm to the ground, odds are we're doing something good. Odds are we're making a positive change in some way. And all that is hey, my brain can now take in information that lets my palm get to the ground. Like that's it. Maybe that leads to something else. But again, like if we can just make you more robust, like you just coughed. Like what if that screwed up your nervous system? Like we're just giving your body just better information is all we're doing.
And two, I think it's important to remember that like we're a complex system. And so because of that, a small change can have a big impact, and sometimes a big change can have minimal impact. And I think that's important to remember. Also, somebody asked a question to me, is like, okay, was Rob's experience, is that typical? And I think when I thought about it more, I was like, no, that's actually fairly atypical. Like it's not uncommon. It's not like super rare that happens, a decent amount. But I think it's important. It's kind of the same thing with like driveline, you could say. Everybody's like, oh, all they do is just do pull downs and rip it as hard as they can. And when that's not actually not the case, that's just what you see on social media. How many times, like what's going to really catch your eye? Like the boring, like, your low intent day, like, no. So it's kind of the same thing. Like square one, we're going to showcase like the best results, but that's not just because to show the potential of what square one can do. You need to see the best results that we've had.
Like I'm not going to broadcast, like, hey, today's recovery day, and it's a 45-second compilation of some guy going through range of motion and doing some hangs and throwing, and it's like, look at this recovery day. It's like no one cares about that. Everyone wants to see the guy grunting 98 on a pull down day and he blows out his arm. Like that's what people want to see. And like if you're trying to grow something, you're not going to post the average ones. Like I'm not going to like, if I'm starting a baseball place and I wanted to like get people to buy my stuff, I wouldn't post the guy going from 80 to 84. I'd post the guy going from 84 to 94 or 80 to 90. I'd show these huge big changes. And I think that goes to another discussion about social media and what we put out there. But not everyone, like you said, not everyone's going to experience this crazy change. And I think it's important to note that like square one is just like everything else. Sometimes you do great things, sometimes you get minor things. It's just how it works.
And I think that's important though when it comes to like, being honest with people as far as, hey, like the average response is going to be more of this. And to understand how to put that in context of, okay, well, at least now your system, because I was thinking back to like with Tanner, it's like, or even when, somebody had a nerve injury, it's like, man, why is my velo back? Like I'm better at putting in all this work. And it's like, well, dude, you're not fully healthy yet. So why would your body let you throw as hard as you used to throw if you're not fully healthy yet? But when you get to a place where like now it's not even a thought of that injury, it doesn't even cross your mind. Now you can actually work back at that high intent output. And I think that's kind of the thing is like, okay, maybe Tanner, you have all this range of motion or whatever, but now you're not having to think or feel like the restriction. So all of a sudden that may allow you to explore more, that it may allow you to now work at the intensities to explore those edges more to actually find that next jump for you and from a skill standpoint. And so I look at like, like at what is the floor, you could say, of like when I do this intervention, what's the floor as far as like, what's the minimum effect that's going to happen here? And I look at like the floor for square one is generally pretty positive. It's either it's going to do nothing, which, well, at least we didn't hurt you. And then, or, now at least I know that your nervous system is not going to be triggered or it's in a, you could say homeostasis state. And I think that's a good thing versus like, okay, you come triggered. Well, now all of a sudden now your system is having to compensate all around that. And like, that probably is going to lead to more things shutting down rather than turning on. And so that's where I see the benefit of square one is at least I can get your system back to more of a homeostasis state.
Yeah, we're just trying to get your body to a point where little things don't mess it up. Like we're just trying to upgrade. Like we're just trying to upgrade the software. We're not trying to give you. We're not trying to give you everything, like anything. And I think that's a super. I know we've talked about it a lot, but that's a super important point. Is that we're just trying to create just a better highway. Like get rid of the potholes. Just to make sure information can get into the brain and get processed. Whatever happens after that happens. And I think, like the reason why I'm so passionate and so I love square one so much is because there's nothing like it. There's nothing out there that does what it does. There's nothing out there that can repeat what it does. There are like copycats of it, but there's nothing out there that if you put it up against square one will be able to do even half the things that square one's able to do. And I think that something else to be said about it is that it's actually, I think it's one of the easiest systems to learn out of anything that's out there. Easier than Prescript, easier than PRI stuff, easier than Bill Hartman stuff. Easier. It's the easiest thing to learn because everything it runs on the assumptions that it runs on are true. Like it runs on the assumption that the kinetic chain is a real thing. It runs on the assumption that up and down and left and right are opposites. Like, and that's what it's based on. And those things are not arguable because one, up and down are opposites. Left and right are opposites. If the kinetic chain wasn't real, why do we need ground force? So because those things are true, therefore square one is true. And there are other nuances to it, but it's so good for what it does, and it's so unbelievable once you learn it and you see how truly good it can be. And like everything else, just because you take the course doesn't mean you're the guy now. You still have to practice it. You still have to learn. Like there are still the people who are really good at it are really good because one, they practiced and they're extremely creative. Because it all comes down to the triggers. It all comes down to how well can you trigger someone, how weird, how unusual, how well can you trigger someone. And if you know how to do that, then you're going to be fantastic at square one. Obviously, you have to know how to test, but if you can figure out how to trigger and you can pick, there's no such thing as picking the right or the perfect trigger, because the perfect trigger is the one that triggers them. But if you can consistently, like we said, we don't want them to come back and see us, but if I'm able to get you with, weird stuff that I make up, that's really, really good, because your body's just going to be more resilient to more stuff.
Also, too, to me, it's all about the testing. If I'm good at testing and the triggering, and that's, to me, is the real skill. But going back to the triggering, or no, going back to what you're talking, the basic principles, the best part again about the system is the test retest. So, if you want to be able to validate the system, you just have to test it. Like that is the whole thing. Is like, the other thing that I think is important to say is that when you're running square one, you get to set, and you probably should set, all your assumptions aside. You let the system tell you what's going on with the person. If you come in being like, oh, I know that the problem is in the T-spine, maybe you're right. But if you're wrong, you're just going to spend all your time focusing there. And like, how much do our biases prevent us from seeing what's actually going on? And so that to me is like the best part of the system is like, I can show up and I don't need to know anything about what's going on with you, or, I don't have to bring my assumptions, because my assumptions could be wrong. And rather I get to use like ecological language here, I get to go explore and I get to discover what is going on with you. And it's kind of the same thing of like, okay, I might not know exactly what the best way for you to move is, but let's go discover exactly what is best for you. And so to me, square one is just the like inverse of that when it comes to like, okay, from a rehab standpoint, all right, we're going to figure out what's going on with you and what's actually the issue. And so for me, that's an important piece that makes it different from all the other things that are out there, is they make assumptions on how things are supposed to go, rather than just seeing and observing simply how things are.
It's like going to, like, if you ask any, well, not any, but if you ask most PTs or ATs or even strength coaches, you're like, hey, this guy's got a knee issue. What are the first two things you're going to look at? Ankle and hip. Every time, ankle and hip. That's the bias that you're having. Versus with square one, the knee hurts. Okay, let's see what's going on. It might be hip, it might be ankle, but we're now confirmed, like, then that's the case. And the thing is one thing, you said kind of, we're going to explore and figure it out. Like, Sean likes to talk about the nervous system as like a history book. And sometimes if I'm working on someone and I go to their knee like 18 to 20 times, the joint action keeps being something in the knee, I might ask, hey, have you ever had any knee issues? And more times than not, they'll be like, yeah, I had, meniscus surgery, or I had ACL surgery. Like, we're letting the body tell us the story. We're not telling a story. Like, we're just reading the book. That's all we're doing. And I think that, again, what makes it so much better is that you can't have any bias in it, because if you do have bias, it's going to prove you wrong. Like, Sean always talks about, when he does square one, he wants to be proven wrong. He always says, I'm waiting for the day that it doesn't work. I'm waiting for the day that, Sean's always looking to have square one not work. Like, he's always looking for something to happen that doesn't cause it. And because of that, it just keeps getting better and better and better, because he's trying to prove his own system wrong.
So Tanner, any kind of, you could say, closing thoughts? I'm not sure that I'm wrapping quite yet, but I'm gonna try to land the plane here on the, we're going on the descent here.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of potential with this in the ecological world, just because it does open up options for different solutions, or different movement solutions, or it has the ability to. I guess the one thing I'm struggling with is some of the terminology. It makes it seem like the brain or the nervous system is very much like a computer. And I don't think that's what square one is trying to portray, but I think some of the language sounds that way. Would that be correct? Or
I would say that sometimes it's difficult, and maybe it's just me, it's difficult to explain square one to people without using the language that square one likes to use, because we're trying to interpret the language that square one, because it's very, very specific language, and use that to describe it. So, like, for example, square one talks about the disorganizing step and the organizing step. And when it's taught, you actually have to flip it around when you're going for, you would think, oh, like this disorganizing, I'm going to look, in that side, but you actually have to look in the organizing side. So I think sometimes it's difficult, and maybe this is just me, Garrett, I don't know if like you run into this, but at least for me, sometimes if it's tough to explain with the same terminology, because like the terminology is slightly different. Like, for example, like it talks, like when we talk about, pronating and supinating, that's in square one, that's like a general term to describe what's going on rather than using it to describe IR and ER. It's really just like a general term. So it's like slightly different than, what is usually taught.
Yeah, and I guess I'm getting more into the terminology of like, the central nervous system or the brain is like processing. And I know it's probably the best word probably to use. Just to me, like I know from my background, my experience as a coach and going through, the courses from Emergence and learning about ecological dynamics is that f of x does not always equal y. And in a computer system, f of x always equals y.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think that's kind of where the terminology, I mean, I don't know. I would almost challenge you. Can we find a better terminology to explain what's going on while also making it simple to understand?
I think from my perspective of my history with like Sean and seeing some stuff over the years, not seeing everything, the information that he's working with is going to be the mainstream, like neuroscience. So the reason why you're hearing software and information processing is because that's the dominant narrative within the neuroscience and the psychology and stuff that he's interacted with. And so for me, I am having to translate this, taking like my understanding from an ecological perspective and trying to understand where this fits. And so where I see it fitting is more we're working on the organismic, right? So if you're thinking about the constraint-led approach, right, for the listeners, right, you have the organism, you have the task, and then you have the environment. Now, all these things play into when you run square one, right? Like the triggers are generally environmental or task oriented.
Right.
But when it comes to how that interaction plays out, it's going to play out through the nervous system is going to be a primary a thing that there's going to be driving the perception, you could say. And so the reason why I think about it in terms of it's hard because again, ecological, all these things are theories, right? So a lot of it is conceptual, or I can't think of the other word where it's like, cerebral. There we go. Right. So we're doing our best to understand the things that we are observing. Okay. So when I think about it, like, okay, again, I think about it as terms of signaling. It's electrical impulses. Like there's a lot of is what's going on here. And so, at the base level, now it's about explaining like what's going on. Is it working in a direct perception way? Well, how mechanistically, how is direct perception happening? To me, it's how things are lighting up, right? So I can directly perceive something. I don't have to process it. It's how the thing lights up in my mind of like, the using the machine learning was the neural net analogy. Okay. When something lights up together, you don't have to process it. It's directly specifying what's going on. And so you can have things that happen instantaneously or very fast, essentially. And so to me, that's where square one is just helping the signal to send the signal faster, essentially. You could talk about like myelin or whatever. I don't think that's really, we're not myelinating things. We're instead just reconnecting like the circuitry, like the copper wiring was like a little disconnected or whatever. And all of a sudden we made that connection clean again. And now the electricity can cleanly go through is like how I imagine it in my mind. So some of this, and this is why I think, for example, Sean Mishka like doesn't really see this, how this integrates. You could say he's very skeptical of square one. And so, but I see how I understand, or at least how I think about
the ecological approach, I see it fitting. And I see it fitting in the organismic thing constraint category. And I see how it can help perception. And so whether you're talking about it from an information processing standpoint or a direct perception standpoint, I don't think it necessarily matters, because at the end of the day, if we're just being pragmatic, we're whether you want to explain it from a information processing standpoint or an ecological perspective, you can explain it either way of what's going on. And so for me, that's why I want to bring it to everybody, is I definitely think this integrates well with an ecological approach, because if I give you more degrees of freedom, you can do more exploration. You're now more sensitive to your environment, and that sensitivity can hold, instead of being you can attend to the specifying information potentially, or explore to attend to it, and not get distracted with the non-specifying information is not interfering. Or to me, the other way of thinking about it is there's less noise. When Jared, when we were messing around with that other the remote session, right? I thought part of the reason why it didn't work with what we were playing around with was because there was too much noise, right? We've talked about this of some of the things, I actually have to make sure my nervous system, I'm not testing my own nervous system, that I'm actually testing their nervous system. And to me, that's noise, right? I'm creating noise so that I can't get the signal.
I think,
and so
so that point about noise too, I think a good way to describe it as well is the old TVs that have a lot of static and you have to move the antennas around. So before you work on someone, think about the antennas, and the TV is just completely static. You can't see the picture. And now think about each layer of square ones. Every time we clear something, is moving that antenna slightly. Now, every time we move that antenna, the picture gets a little more clear and a little more clear. And at one point, you can watch what's going on, but it's not that clear. But you can still see it, and that's moving with faulty expressions. Now, every time we clear out, the picture gets more clear and more clear and more clear and more clear, and that's all we're doing. We're just making the picture more clear. So talking about noise, we're just trying to make we're just trying to, it's already there. We're just trying to reveal it.
Yeah, and so I think there's two ways of thinking about it, right? There's what's going on from just an output standpoint, in terms of, because the nervous system, I think, what it's doing is producing output, but it is also picking up information too. So from an ecological perspective, it's all about, can I be attuned? Can I pick up the specifying information and then couple my movement to that? So the nervous system is basically that conduit between you could say input, the perceiving, and the output, the acting. And so the more that system is, you could say, the clearer you can send in that signal, perceive, the more that you're able to perceive and interact. Because part of, we perceive to act and act to perceive. Okay. So if my ability to take in more information, I can perceive more, and then I can act more. So now that mutual reciprocal relationship all of a sudden is now stronger, because that signal is clear, essentially. Or I can do more exploration because now I have more degrees of freedom. And then because I can explore more, I can get more information. I can perceive the world better. I can interact with it better. And so to me, that's where I look at square one. You could say, I still look at it as a tool, but I understand what Jared is saying of it is that toolbox, you could say, where it's the thing, it's the container by which, we now make everything easier. The signal is better. And that's, to me, it's a foundational thing. And that's why I see it more as when I'm running square one, I'm sitting over in the organismic element, initially, because I'm working on something that's internal. The nervous system sits internal in the body. So that's why I see it as organismic. But once I start running the system, we start now getting to more ecological, in the sense of how am I interacting with the world, and how is that affecting me, the individual. And so now all of a sudden, we're starting to work in a mutual reciprocal way as we start to run the system. But as far as what my intention is more focused on the internal part of the system, being the central nervous system. So that's where in my mind, it's not fully ecological, because where my intent is not necessarily fully on the external, because yes, I am trying to make you more resilient to these external factors, but what am I really interacting with in my mind? And what am I giving the body back? Degrees of freedom. Well, that's more internal. That's the intrinsic dynamics of the system. So I'm really working on the intrinsic dynamics of the system more so than I am about the external. It's still there, but I just in my mind of like, where is the real focus? It's more internal. So that's where it does sit more in an isolated. I don't know. I don't see it as being. I can see why some people struggle to see like, oh, that's not fully ecological. But like, I don't know, ecological dynamics is like everywhere. So like, the more you think about a thing ecologically, the less you get into this like, it's ecological or not ecological. It's like it's the whole thing of like constraints. Oh, am I using a constraint or not? Yes, you're always using constraints. There's in no situation where there's not a constraint present unless, I don't know, you're in a vacuum or something. I don't know, but there's its own weird constraint. So anyways, that's where I'm just, yeah. So there's my little rant on that. Hopefully that helps a little bit as far as seeing how Square One relates or could interact with ecological dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that it can definitely have a place. Like I'm not arguing that fact.
Yeah, I guess more you're just trying to see how that works together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, we can land the plane. Jared, what resources would you kind of recommend for those who are interested in learning more about Square One?
Their social media is fantastic. I believe it's Square One System on all platforms. And just go on their website, Square One System. I think I honestly think the best resource is, if you're interested in this, is take it. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to learn more, and you're going to learn something you don't know, even if you never use it. It's just worth it. But going like scroll through their social media, message Sean. He loves talking to people about this, so he'll always be, he'll talk forever about this, and so he's like a great resource. But I think like you're not going to find any books. Well, actually, I'll save that for later. But you're not going to find any books right now on this. You're not going to read neurology books and understand this. Just like go through it, kind of learn, and then just take it from there. I think is the best thing to do. Just go ahead, look up Square One, watch their videos, see the stuff they put out. Ryan Thompson is a great guy as well to follow. He puts up a lot of really, really good stuff. So I would start there for people who are interested in this.
And two, there's a really good video that Sean, I think, delivered kind of around the pandemic, a lecture, and he kind of lays out what Square One is. So I can link that in the description. And then two, Jared, what other resources? Where can people find you? What other resources would you recommend additionally to that? And where can people find you?
If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter. It's at is it that? I don't remember, but I think it's @IM_Slater R. Yeah, so it's @IM_Slater with an extra R at the end. In terms of resources, I think like Square One, like just looking at their stuff, I think is a really good thing. I post a lot about it too. I think I think with anything, the first thing, like best thing to do is just dive head first into it. Don't like dip your toe in the water, because if you dip your toe in the water, you're never going to fully commit. I think just fully committing to it, and fully committing it to, for some people, it could be taking the course. For some people, it could be giving them a follow, interacting. Some people, it could just be watching it. I think just opening up your mind to it, I think is just a really good idea. And, you could take it and you could think this stuff is stupid, I'm never going to use it. And that's great. It's your opinion about something, and that's how you think about it. But I just think that, taking your time to look into it, I think it's well worth your time to at least just look into it for anyone who works with athletes, or even people. I think just look into it.
And even for myself, going back to what you had said before of like, take it even if you don't use it. Like that's been me. Like more because I think it's important for people to understand, like the muscle testing is, if you can't do muscle testing, you can't run the system. Now, I think from what I've observed of like the new things that Sean has put out, you can still actually clear some things out even without muscle testing. And that's actually, we should have said this at the beginning, but here we are. The Square One, the base system is like a sniper rifle. it will dial in, or like a scalpel. It can get right to the source. There are other things that you can do that you can take more of a shotgun approach, and like you might not know what exactly the issue is, but you're gonna hit whatever that is, and like, for example, if you were to do a comprehensive isometric, and try to hit all the joint actions in the whole body, you're probably gonna get one, and clear something out, and then put the system in an organized state. But it's just really inefficient. And so I think that's kind of the thing of like, even for me too, having taken it, it changed my view on how I look at things, of understanding like, you know what, this is very complex. Like it might be this thing, this obvious thing, or it could be something completely different. And if I'm not getting results, I know that it probably is not, let's just say, one joint away. It could be 2, 3, 4, multiple different things. And so it's given me appreciation for that, of the complexity of the human movement system, and like just like everything that's going on with it. So I do recommend like people taking it and trying to really understand the system and the potential of the system. And even if you don't always utilize it, having different ways to help people, or know, like, for example, for me, I'm like, man, okay, the traditional way isn't working. Like, I really think at this point, like, square one is your best bet. You've tried all these other things, and so square one, I think, is probably like the thing that we're missing here, is like, you're not talking directly to the problem. You're talking past the body. You're giving all these exercises, and the body's like, like, exercise is fine. I can do exercise, but that's not what I need. Like, you're not really talking or speaking to my problem. And so that's where I think square one can actually, get on the same page with the body of like what's going on and addressing the issue. So, anyways, hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. Until next.